civics is a mandatory subject in each grade after grade 8. You ask a kid on the street here today, even perhaps a graduate of university, find Prince George on the map, and they wouldn't be able to tell.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
They wouldn't be able to tell you. And by the way, I had personal experience of that happening to me with a person who had a master's of arts from a Canadian university who worked for me in Vancouver after I moved out to British Columbia. I had to take these people off the phones with the company I worked for because somebody would be calling in from Prince George or Sycamoose or Vernon, right? Or Vanderhoof, right? Or wherever, mainly in British Columbia. And these people didn't know where they were calling from. I had a master's degree. And you all know yourselves, I don't have to explain this to you. One of our big problems today is because we don't even understand our own Constitution. And why don't we understand our Constitution? Because we don't have any basic understanding of it, because it wasn't mandatory in our schools, it wasn't mandatory in our universities, and we became quite uninformed about who we are, how we get there, and how we are governed. This is mandatory from my point of view. Don't worry, sir. I'm coming to your point. Don't worry. How about this one? The power of the Prime Minister must be reduced. Work for the Prime Minister today? No, not the departments. How many work in his office? The Prime Minister's office and the Privy Council office, which are both really the same thing. How many work? Over 1,500. 1,500, and he has, besides that, 7,000 deputy ministers and assistant deputy ministers in all the departments and agencies of government.
Lock them all up!
That number must be reduced to not more than 500. Now listen to this, and I just looked this up the other day, and I even got a shock because I was using a lower number. The more than 206 departments and agencies of the federal government. There's 206 departments and agencies of the federal government, and they employ 320,000 Canadians. So let those departments and those public servants do the work of the Prime Minister's office, because that's what they were elected to do in the first place. That's what they were hired to do in the first place. Let the deputy ministers and assistant deputy ministers do their job, not have it come out of the Prime Minister's office. The power of the Prime Minister and the premiers has become too powerful. We now have an executive government, not a parliamentary government. We have an executive government without a shot being fired. The Prime Minister of Canada was acting like he was President of the United States, rather than as a Prime Minister of Canada.
That's the truth.
Be right at dawn.
Next one. There must be a 3-day public First Ministers' Conference annually by all the premiers and leaders of the territories and the Prime Minister. This must be mandatory to discuss the pressing national issues of the day. All governments must publicly issue written statements at the conference highlighting what they think are the national priorities. Not do a spin at a press conference, not do a press release. Force all of the First Ministers of this nation to get together once a year and to issue a public statement at that conference of what they think is important for Canada. You like this one? Canadian courts hearing a constitutional case related to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms must be obligated to consider in their written rulings the two introductory concepts of the Charter, the supremacy of God and the rule of law. No decision rendered without a written consideration in the decision of these principles will be valid. Right now we have courts in our land that have already ruled on charter provisions without even discussing the two concepts of supremacy of God and the rule of law, both of which are in the charter. We had a constitutional expert here 2 speakers ago, Dr. Lugosi. He referenced this in his speech just a few minutes ago. It's just not me talking this. It's people who studied the Constitution at length and comes to the same conclusion that I come to. One of the people that happened to create it and write it, you know. Two more. This is not exhaustive, but if we could get these done, then we could move on to a few more that need to be done. But here are 2 more, and these are very, very current. Canada, this is another declaration of our new Magna Carta. Canada must remain a sovereign nation. Therefore, no treaty or international regulations of any kind can be agreed to by Canada that in any way erode our sovereignty. We are either sovereign or we're not. You can't be half sovereign, nor can you be half pregnant. You can't be half sovereign. Whatever you think of Trump, just put it one side. Whether he did it by accident, whether he did it, however he did it, when he got out of that Trans-Pacific Treaty thing, and when he got out of the World Health Organization, he was right. He was right. And over the years, many times I have, through my active political career and afterwards, I have acknowledged if somebody, even I was opposed to politically, but if he or she said something that was sensible and reasonable and made sense. You've got to acknowledge it if in fact it's true. As Dr. Lugosi would say, it comes down to truth. It comes down to the golden rule. Right? And if we are to be a sovereign nation and have control, one of the reasons why, I think I might have said it here on the stage before, one of the reasons why Britain finally said no to going into the European Union, becoming just one political group like the rest, was because the farmer got a letter in the mail in the Midlands of England before the vote, which said, next year, Brussels is going to tell you how many bushels of wheat you can grow. We would be no longer sovereign. That's when the rural Britons rose up and helped defeat England going in the European Union. If you don't want somebody else deciding your bushels of wheat, then we will reject what the government of Canada and now the government of the United States and other countries are trying to do by amending these international regulations, health regulations, to give control over what they think is an emergency has to be an emergency in Canada. We cannot accept that. We are sovereign. We'll decide. And lastly, membership in any international organization must be conditional upon Canada remaining a completely sovereign nation. So to those who say that we're only here to attack, let them listen to what I just said. Let them read what we just completed, because this shows you we have alternatives that are natural. As the doctors and the medicine people said about the vaccines, the same thing. There are alternatives. All of these alternatives we just mentioned, we can put into practice tomorrow if we had a majority of Canadians on our side. They would not be able to go against it. If we had a majority of Canadians on our side, we can make change. But the first thing we have to do, and it hurts me to say it, the first thing we have to do is we have to change our own political parties to be honest and forthright. If we don't, then the rest doesn't change, because they've gotten away with not being honest, and they know how they can get away then with being not honest when they form the government. We must do that. We must do that. Whether your mother or your father or your grandfather was Liberal, Conservative, NDP or Green or whatever, we've got to come to the understanding now after these past 2 years. If we've learned anything, we've learned that we must fundamentally change the way we operate as Canadians if we are to make meaningful change, and these kinds of oppressive measures don't happen again. A gentleman came up to me over here 5 minutes before I was due to speak, and he said, "Brian, when you get up to speak, I'm counting on you to do something for me." I said, "Okay, sir, what's that?" He said, "Please acknowledge and get the people here to acknowledge the hurt and the suffering that's happening right now amongst families, small businesses and others who've been hurt either because of the mandates and the draconian measures that have been put in, where there was delayed surgeries, delayed specialist appointments, or people who've been hurt because of the vaccine. There are a lot of people hurting, and we must acknowledge that. Not only ways to rectify, we must acknowledge that even out here amongst the people that are here today, you have either relatives or friends who have been hurt by what has happened in the last 2 years. We must acknowledge that they're in pain. We have it in our own family. We have it in our own extended family, Carol and I. All the way to death. And the children. And so we must, in exclaiming freedom and explaining all those shoulders that we're standing on,